Definitely. I'm PG and I work on the product management team at Crestron. I'm specifically focused on our hospitality part of the business, which we really kind of define as hotels in terms of what we focus on. And being on the product management side, it's my goal or my job to really drive a roadmap of true hospitality solutions, which would complement the many amazing solutions that Crestron already makes and has made for a long time that are used in hotels today and have been for quite some time. Um, I'm relatively new to this job, but one of the reasons I took it was because I have a personal passion for hotels and travel in general. I'm a big points and miles person and have been, fortunate to go across the world to some pretty great places, fly on great airlines and also stay in some great resorts and hotels. Um, so that's one of the reasons that I was very, motivated for this job. I was, as well as the fact that it was about technology, which is what my background is. Um, and while I'm relatively new to this job, there's a lot I've learned about technology in hotels, and there's a lot of different ways that guests interact with that technology, either directly or indirectly. And if I could tell you one thing I've learned about being in this job in this industry is that the word guest experience is probably used more than any other term that there is for obvious reasons. And while I think technology has this opportunity to really create some extra special and great customer experiences, technology on the flip side can also pretty easily create negative guest experiences. Things we've probably all dealt with, like you're in a hotel room and you can't figure out how to turn off a light. Such a simple and basic thing, yet that happens even at high-end resorts. So that's just one of the things that I think about quite a bit. So the other thing I think about quite a bit as well is, how do you make things convenient for a hotel guest with technology? For a lot of the younger generations, we're glued to our phones probably more than we should be, but the more that we can do from that phone, the better. So, when I think about technology and a guest and staying in a hotel, what's the most convenient way for me to unlock my door when I get there, to turn on a light or turn off a light when I'm going to bed, even to do things like order room service. And me personally, I'd rather not pick up the phone and talk to someone and request those things if I don't have to, right? I'd rather just pull up a phone and pull up an app or a browser window and be able to do all that stuff. And I think what's also interesting about technology today is there's more of an opportunity than ever to really personalize the experience for the guest, especially in their guest room. If you think about recent hotel stays you've probably had one where you walked in and there was some education about how you can fling Netflix onto the TV, watch your own content, or how you can connect your phone to Bluetooth, let's say, and play your own Spotify or Apple Music content. And while some of those experiences are very clunky and not right, there are some ways that those experiences can be quite simple for the guest. And I think especially for the business traveler, as they're away from home, they're away from the comfort of their homes, the more that you can add those little touches to the hotel experience, I think the more loyal that guest comes to you, or that comes to the hotel and that brand. And the last thing I'll say as it relates to really what I do, I focus and think a lot about sound because prior to working for Crestron, most of my career is at the audio company Sonos. And you can ask my wife, basically every time we walk into a business, hotels included, I'm always looking for speakers if I hear sound, what's the audio, what are the speakers, etc. But quite often I'm doing the opposite and complaining that, wow, I'm surprised there's no music at this setting where I think music would make it that much better, or the music is way too loud, or the music is way too quiet. And I think more than ever, there's just an easier opportunity for a business to play music and play it well and have it add to the vibe versus it being something that might be missing. Yeah, the biggest change I would say are mobile devices, our phones, right? If you go back 10 years or maybe even longer now, a cell phone was never a part of the hotel guest technology experience, right? You'd get to the hotel, you'd go talk to a human, you'd check in, you'd get a physical key, You would touch things in your room to make phone calls, to turn on lights, to have the TV go on, whatever it might be. If you ever needed something like a towel, you'd call the front desk with a phone. So, we've really moved from, almost like an analog, very kind of human interaction centric model, so to speak, to this digital world now where, a lot of the things that I need to do and want to do and would like to do the most, I can do from my phone. And I think, you started to see, a lot of businesses of different types adopt that, from, ordering food and picking it up at McDonald's to, wherever, or, same thing with hotels again. A lot of hotels over the years, the big brands, if you look at them, they focused a lot on their own apps and what can you all do with that? How can I keep my guest, my customer in this app? How can I get them to, frankly, spend more money, via making things easier on the digital side? So I'd say that's the biggest change. And, as with that, you see some devices change. So if you think about sound and audio, you go to a hotel 15 years ago, maybe you've got some speakers in your room. It's a little bit nicer of a hotel resort. Maybe you've got a suite. You've got these round volume controls in the bathroom and maybe in the living room where there's like 5 buttons that says whatever, jazz, rock, and there's this little knob that we know, turn to the right, the music volume's going to go up, etc. You don't really see that as much anymore, or hopefully you don't, because there are more elegant ways to change the music, change the volume. And again, those often revolve around our own devices and digital content, and things like that. Yeah, it's critical to, one, have the interface, but more importantly, make the interface simple. If I relate that to my job at Crestron, Crestron has been in business for over 50 years, making, products for almost every type of building you can imagine. But, a core of what we've done in a long time is making these control systems. So, a system that ties together different devices, often our own or from partners, into one system that then, as a user, you usually have an interface where you can do things like turn lights on or push a scene button that makes, lights go on, shades go up, music start, all these types of things. And one of the things I've learned from a hotel perspective is quite often these interfaces are not that good. They are complex, they are not intuitive. And if you think about hotels specifically, it's kind of a unique type of building because you have guests from all over the globe at any given hotel at any different time. So, there's a language element, even little things like icons, right? Icons could probably vary between cultures and countries of, oh, I think this icon does that, but someone on the other side of the world thinks it does the opposite. So you really have to focus on simplicity, one, I think, but also just nail then, what that interface does. And that's why, from a Crestron perspective, since I've been here, we've started to move away from kind of these custom programmed systems that the interface is very subjective to whoever is programming and installing that. Granted, they could make something beautiful, but they could also not make something beautiful and make something complex, which is why, we focus a lot more on our Crestron Home platform, which is more of a kind of programming list system that has a pretty defined interface that we know is true and trusted and easy for the user to use. So, interface is huge. You could have the best system of whatever we're talking about with the most expensive touch panel, touch screen. But if it's complex to use, if buttons don't make sense, if I don't know how to do basic functions, I think you failed. From an ambiance perspective, I think there's really 2 items or areas that hotels and frankly all customer-facing businesses should be focused on. And they are sound and light. I believe sound and lighting are the 2 kind of dimensions of an experience that are very controllable and are often overlooked. I think from a sound perspective, if you are in a restaurant, you're in a hotel lobby, there is this natural, I think, necessity to have music. But I think often there isn't, and it's overlooked. And I think, the person managing the lobby or the restaurant or whomever it is just doesn't think about that. And, I'm not exactly sure how you change that. That's a hard one to change, but I think if you do get to the next step then, and they are playing music, it's not just about playing music, it's about playing the right music for the right moment, right? If you have, death metal playing for a group of 80-year-olds at a restaurant they bought out, that's probably going to negatively impact the guest experience. So it's about the content and finding content that I think is right for the moment, right for the place. But then also the volume. I am overly critical of, music being too loud or being too soft, given all my time at Sonos and always thinking about sound. But I think, you can really nail the experience if the volume is, you can hear the music, but you can still have a conversation. It's not overpowering, but you can also kill the experience where it's so loud that you can't have a conversation. And if it's, too quiet, then I think you're just missing out on the opportunity to have people hear that music. So I think, sound plays a critical role in the ambiance to any guest-facing experience, especially hotels. And then, I did spend a couple of years at a smart home startup called Oro before joining Crestron. And we focused on a lighting system that was, kind of human-centric circadian lighting. And, how does the impact of light affect your body on a day-to-day basis? And, you can, learn a lot just by Googling these terms. But point is, I think lighting is similar. If I walk into a restaurant and I go to take my seat and the light's some bright LED above me at 100%, that's right in my eye, that's really going to disrupt my experience there. And, quite often what I think we've all seen is you're at a restaurant for dinner, especially. At some point, someone decides, oh, it's later now, we should make the lights a little bit dimmer. And you have this very dramatic change where the lights went from like 80% to 30%. And it was not subtle. Everyone noticed. It's like, what just happened to the lights? And they probably turned the lights down too much. So I think, having the lighting at the right, levels or intensities is pretty key to that experience. But then you can also take it a step further and think about, tunable lighting fixtures like Crestron now makes, where you can control also the color and the temperature. And, if you think about this whole human-centric circadian thing, and you can literally have lighting in your house, in your hotel room, in your business, mimic what the sun is doing outside and get those kind of more natural benefits versus, being in a box that has lights at 100% that, aren't really helping you too much. I can't say that I've seen studies about, circadian rhythms and how sound might impact that. I do believe, without looking it up right now, that there is science on that. But if you just think about it kind of organically as a human being, music has this special power to kind of transform an experience, including transforming a bad experience, right? Like if you are at the dentist, a place people usually don't like to go to, and you're getting a cavity filled or something uncomfortable in your mouth, but you have the ability to play your favorite song, album, artist, playlist at that moment, it distracts your brain a little bit and it gives you a little bit of comfort. So I do think, there's some element of that as it relates to sound and how it makes us feel, especially in bad situations, or even to just go from good to extra happy. The right song comes on, people flip a switch, right, and they start dancing or singing out loud. And whether that impacts your circadian rhythm, again, I don't know for a fact, but I do think music can positively impact your day on a day-to-day basis. Yeah, so I had I've interacted with technology a lot in hotels because of my points and miles, passion and having the ability to have traveled, across the world quite a bit. But one of the experiences with technology in a hotel that really stands out was a hotel in Prague that my wife and I were at. We were there, and I think it was a Friday afternoon. We were walking through the lobby, getting ready to go out into the city for the evening. As we were walking through this lobby, we saw that there was a DJ, DJ table, pretty typical setup. But what was different was you didn't hear anything. There was no audible sound. But then if you kind of did a double take, you saw that there was like a, group of 10 to 15 people, and they were wearing headphones and they were dancing and smiling and having a good time. When my wife and I saw that, we knew what that was. That's a silent disco. We experienced it at a music festival before. It's basically, you're having this DJ set through headphones in your own experience, but you're still experiencing that with other people around you, just without hearing it out loud. So we had a really fun experience with that at that music festival. So we were intrigued enough to then walk over and, grab a pair of headphones each and, put them on and listen to the DJ and dance around and have fun for 10 minutes. So, that from a technology perspective is not that complex of an experience to make that happen, to have the DJ sound just, go into some wireless headphones. But, had the DJ just been there playing music out of some speakers like normal, we would have walked through the lobby and walked out of the hotel to where we were going. But there was some curiosity about, why is there a DJ? I don't hear anything. People are having fun. So that was just, I think one small example where, technology did enable a pretty fun experience that, was memorable. Yeah, I have, been fortunate to have experienced with SoundMachine twice in my career, working at Sonos. Sonos and SoundMachine have been partners for a long time, and had an opportunity to work together. And now at Crestron, we recently launched support for SoundMachine on our Crestron systems. And I think, the part about SoundMachine that kind of consistently jumps out, and I think it's just part of the music, choosing music is curation, right? Again, I talk a lot about music, having the right music for the right moment, the right place, blah, blah, blah. That comes down to curation. We as, novices can all pick a song that we like at a given moment, but, it takes some pretty careful curating to really curate, just the right sampling of music for the right setting. So I think because SoundMachine, has so many different curated playlists or stations, and for the user of that system in, say, the hotel lobby, it's a Friday afternoon, their hotel is in Hawaii, it's beautiful outside, it's going to be happy hour. It's very easy for them to flip on a playlist that matches that mood, a tropical summer playlist or whatever it might be. So I think SoundMachine does a lot of great things, but one of the ones is just the curation of the music, and making it easy as well to just access that music and know what to play at the right time just by looking at the description of a playlist, and even just the name of it. You get what you pay for, so to speak. And if you choose summer holiday pop, you're going to get good curated sampling of music that you would think fits in that description. So if I look ahead and think about sound and music and how they might shape the customer experience in a hotel setting, I think a lot about data. So I can't cite any specific data points for you, but I know there is data that exists out there on music and sound and how that positively impacts not just people's experience, but also their propensity to buy more. If we're talking about, say, a store within the hotel or outside of the hotel, the right music, will keep you in that place and keep you spending more money. And I think hotels are good examples because you have spas sometimes, you have restaurants almost every time. And, if the right ambiance is there via the music, I think you're more likely to, spend more time in that restaurant, which probably means you're ordering more drinks, ordering more food, these types of things. So, I think that principle is really true for any business that's customer facing, including hotels. But I think what's different now, as I think about the future, is it used to be much harder to play music in a hotel or a business setting. Back when music was analog, when even more recently it was based on CDs and wired connections to speakers and receivers and amplifiers and all this kind of stuff. You could achieve the same thing, but it just took more effort. It wasn't as easy. It wasn't easy to set up and move, etc. But now we're in this really interesting world, and it's only going to get better and easier, where you've got this kind of magical combination of technology has advanced, music has gone digital. So for you as the front desk person again at the hotel, to change the mood or the genre of the music, or maybe even depending on music service, or kind of regulations at that in that place, play a specific song at that moment, you can, with like 3 clicks of your phone, you can change the entire mood and ambiance of that specific moment just by putting on a certain playlist or song. And thanks to technology, thanks to music being digital, like it is via SoundMachine, it takes seconds to make those things happen, where before you would have had to maybe get a CD out and skip to a track, and you would have missed that moment that you were trying to hit. And I think all of that is only going to get easier as music's not going to go back to analog, I don't think, minus this kind of resurgence in turntables and records, which is cool. But music is going digital. It's only getting more digital. Technology is only getting more advanced. So I really think the ability to create those experiences has gotten easier, and it's really up to the business owner then to make those decisions to invest a little bit of money in some Crestron audio or wireless sound experience or whatever it might be. Like, all the building blocks are there. It's really easy. It's not nearly as expensive as it used to be. So I hope more business owners think about these things and work sound, especially into their experiences.